Another day, another dinosaur to learn. This time the survivor would take control of the Omniraptor, a small but highly adaptable predator capable of hunting alone or alongside others. Before learning how to hunt, he would first need to survive. His journey began during the middle of the night. Not exactly an ideal start. Darkness covered the landscape. Trees stretched endlessly into the distance, and strange sounds echoed through the wilderness. For someone who barely knew the map, every direction looked exactly the same. After wandering through the darkness for quite some time, he finally heard something promising. Water, but as he approached the shoreline, he noticed something lying nearby. Immediately, he slowed down. Dead bodies near water were rarely a good sign, because in many cases there was a reason they were there. And there was one predator in particular that loved waiting near rivers, lakes and ponds. The water looked calm, too calm. No movement, no ripples. But that was exactly what made Deinosuchus so terrifying. You rarely saw them before it was too late. The risk simply wasn't worth it. Unfortunately, his hunger was becoming a serious problem. Before long, he spotted an opportunity. A wild boar. Finally, something he could hunt. At first, everything seemed under control. The boar was taking damage. Blood marked its path. And with each successful attack, it looked more likely that the hunt would soon be over. His stamina was becoming a problem. His hunger was becoming a problem. And before long, the hunt itself was becoming a problem. Yet there was no turning back. He had already invested too much time. Before he could react, the boar launched one final attack. A direct hit. The exhausted Omniraptor had nothing left. After all the chasing, after all the bleeding, after all the effort, the boar emerged victorious. A new life, a new spawn, and hopefully better luck. This time he appeared near a beach. The search for food started immediately. Before long, he discovered a burrow, finally an opportunity. Small animals often hid underground, and for a young Omniraptor that could mean an easy meal. For a brief moment, both dinosaurs seemed equally surprised. Through bushes and vegetation, the tiny dinosaur disappeared almost as quickly as it had appeared. Within seconds, it was gone. Just another missed opportunity. Still hungry, he continued moving. Eventually, his luck changed. Or at least it appeared to. Lying ahead was the body of a dead Carnotaurus. A massive amount of food. Enough food to support him for quite some time. Slowly, shapes began appearing through the fog. Large shapes. Far larger than him. The first figures to emerge were two Triceratops. Following nearby appeared what looked like an Allosaurus. For a moment he remained completely motionless. A single mistake could reveal his position. Fortunately, the group seemed focused on traveling rather than hunting. Once the danger had passed, he returned to the carcass, eating as much as possible, taking advantage of every remaining piece of food, because opportunities like this never lasted forever. Eventually, the body disappeared entirely, and almost immediately new sounds began echoing through the area. Other dinosaurs, likely drawn by the scent of the carcass. Even though the food was gone, they were still arriving. That was all the warning he needed. The area was becoming crowded, and crowded places rarely stayed safe for long. It was time to leave. For someone who barely knew the map, every journey felt like an expedition. There were no landmarks he recognized, no safe routes, no clear destination. Only instinct and curiosity. No obvious signs of Deinosuchus. No reason to believe a giant crocodile was waiting beneath the surface. At least none that he could see. That was good enough. The island was enormous, and there was still so much he had never seen. As he moved through the landscape, he began hearing more and more dinosaurs around him. Calls echoed across the environment from multiple directions. Large dinosaurs, small dinosaurs, predators, herbivores. The island felt busy, alive. Normally, avoiding unknown dinosaurs would be the smart decision, but curiosity slowly started taking control. After all, he was still learning. As he approached the area, the sounds became impossible to ignore. There were dinosaurs everywhere. Calls echoed across the landscape from multiple directions. A mixed bag. Predators and herbivores occupying the same area. Normally, that would be the kind of situation a small Omniraptor should avoid entirely. To his surprise, nobody seemed interested in attacking him. Not long after, he came across another fortunate discovery, a dead deer. Compared to hunting it himself, this was an incredible find. Free food. Without warning, a juvenile Tyrannosaurus appeared behind him. The young predator had somehow managed to sneak into position completely unnoticed. Before he could react, the attack came. One bite. That was all it took. The island had once again reminded him that danger could appear at any moment. A new day began with a new life. This time he entered the world already hearing signs of conflict nearby. Something was attacking a boar. Curious, he moved closer. There he found the source of the commotion. A juvenile Allosaurus. The young Allo was attempting to bring down the same stubborn species that had ended his very first life. And then things went very wrong. The boar landed a devastating counterattack. Moments later, the juvenile Allosaurus was dead. Just like that, the hunter had become the meal. A sad ending for the young Allo, but a useful one for the Omniraptor. So once again, he found himself staying close to a carcass, eating, growing. Before long, another predator entered the area. A juvenile Tyrannosaurus. The young giant charged directly toward him. There was no misunderstanding its intentions. This was a fight. The Rex may have been young, but it was still dangerous. Eventually, the juvenile Tyrannosaurus collapsed. For the first time, he had successfully defended himself against a Rex. While recovering from the fight, he noticed movement nearby. At first, it seemed distant. Then it became larger. An adult Tyrannosaurus. The giant predator had likely caught the scent of food and was now heading directly toward the area. The moment the Rex started running, he knew it was time to leave. The Omniraptor turned and fled. Massive footsteps thundered behind him as he raced through the environment. Without hesitation, he disappeared into the dense forest. Trees and vegetation surrounded him as he pushed deeper into cover. The giant predator continued searching, but eventually, the sounds became weaker. Then they disappeared completely. The Rex had lost him. But one thing was clear. Knowing an adult Rex was nearby meant this area was no longer suitable for growing. If he wanted to survive, he would need to move once again and hope the next location was a little less dangerous. Eventually, he spotted water in the distance. After everything that had happened, the drink sounded perfect. Without thinking too much about it, he approached the shoreline and drank. Only afterward did he realize something was wrong. This wasn't fresh water. It was salt water. The mistake became obvious almost immediately. Instead of solving his problems, he had created a new one. Now he still needed water, and he still needed food. The situation had somehow become worse. Every direction seemed to stretch endlessly ahead of him. Not knowing the layout made everything more difficult. While traveling, he discovered something else. A strange patch of mud. Curious, he stepped into it. Moments later, he found himself completely covered in mud. What did it do? He had absolutely no idea, but it looked important enough that he assumed it was probably useful. So with his new muddy disguise, he continued forward. After a long period of searching, he finally heard something promising. A deer. Finally, he had secured food through his own efforts. A small victory, but an important one. Not long after, he heard another familiar sound. Flies. One of the best sounds a hungry carnivore could hear. Flies usually meant only one thing: a body nearby. Without thinking much about the risks, he rushed over and took a bite. After all, food was food, and he had no idea when the next opportunity would appear. Standing behind him was a Carnotaurus, the owner of the carcass. The realization came too late. The moment their eyes met, the Carnotaurus charged. One powerful bite landed immediately. At that moment, he knew this situation had become very dangerous. The only option left was to run. The Carnotaurus was faster, stronger, and fully grown. Winning a fight was never an option. Survival depended entirely on escaping. The Omniraptor sprinted into nearby vegetation, hoping to break line of sight. Bushes became his only ally. Again and again he hid. Again and again he moved, trying to stay unpredictable, trying to disappear. The Carnotaurus continued searching. More than once it seemed certain he would be found. Yet somehow he managed to remain hidden. Eventually, the larger predator moved past his position. The Carnotaurus was still somewhere nearby, and revealing his location now would be a fatal mistake. But the darkness continued creeping in. His body was failing. The blood loss was simply too severe. Somewhere in the distance he could still hear movement. Alone among the bushes, the exhausted Omniraptor accepted his fate. Slowly the world faded away, and another life came to an end. After another life and some relatively uneventful growing, he was finally starting to make progress. Not quite an adult yet, but much closer than before. Two adult Ceratosaurus. Immediately the situation became more serious. The Ceratosaurus continued climbing, higher and higher. The moment he realized they could reach him, he didn't hesitate. It was time to leave. Once again, survival depended on speed. The Ceratosaurus followed. But unlike some of his previous encounters, this chase didn't last very long. Using the terrain and vegetation to his advantage, he eventually created enough distance to escape. The sounds behind him slowly faded, then disappeared entirely. Finally, for once, he had survived. No last-second attack, no hidden predator, no unexpected death. Just a clean escape. The following morning brought something even rarer, a moment of peace. Finding a high rocky overlook, he decided to stay put for a while and simply observe the world around him. After spending some time observing the area, he noticed movement approaching. Two Omniraptors. Normally this would have been reassuring. After all, they were the same species. And as far as he understood, Omniraptors couldn't simply eat each other without consequences. At least that was what he believed. The two newcomers continued moving closer. Unfortunately, there was one thing he didn't know. The cannibal mutation, a detail that would soon become very important. Before he had time to react, the two Omniraptors attacked. The encounter was sudden and brutal. Any expectation of safety immediately vanished. The dinosaurs he thought would ignore him had become the greatest threat in the area. Moments later, it was over. Another death. Another lesson learned the hard way. So for now, the journey ends here. The Omniraptor may not have reached adulthood, but he certainly learned plenty along the way. And with a little more experience, perhaps the next adventure will end differently. Thanks for watching, and hopefully we'll see you again in the next survival story.